The time and place are true. The story is true. It comes from the first-hand accounts of Alma, chapter 2, in the Book of Mormon. At the time of harvest in 87 BC, just at sunrise on the hill Amnihu, on the east side of the river Sidon, the Nephite and Amalekite armies had gathered at the appointed time and place to make war over the critical question of who would control the government. Alma, the chief judge of the free government of the Nephites, and Amasai, the newly anointed king of the Amalekites, had agreed to fight. It was a civil war where combatants had come from within the boundaries of those lands whose capital city was Zarahemla. Like most civil wars, this battle would prove to be very bloody. This was the battle for Zarahemla and would last a day, a night and a day. It would be a battle for thousands of square miles that would be fought in a very small place. The winner of the battle would control the city of government and by default would control the lands of the nation. In defiance of the existing government, the Amalekites had already anointed Amalekite as their king. Just a few months before, the majority of the people in a free election affirmed Alma as the chief judge while rejecting Amalekite in his desire to become the king. The battle would be fought over the critical question of which side would have the powers of government. The Amalekites understood that before Amasai could rule as a king he would have to take control of the city of Zarahemla. The Nephites understood if the free citizens wanted to retain the voice of the people to choose their leaders they would have to successfully defend that great city of Zarahemla. The capital city was just across the river from the hill Amnihu on the west side of Sidon. Each battle has specific terrain. For example, the Volga River played an essential part in the Battle of Stalingrad. The cliffs of Omaha Beach had an important role in how the Americans directed their forces on D-Day. The walls of Jerusalem were critical to the Romans and the Jews on that fateful day when Herod's temple was destroyed. The terrain often defines the battle. Once the battle is over, there is only one place in the world where the history of that battle can be told. It is on the battlefield where the war is lost or won. It is in the heat of battle where leaders must command and control their forces by completely focusing on the destruction of the opposing side. The objective of a battle regardless of time and place is to close in and destroy the enemy. Because the terrain has such an impact on the engagement of forces, the place of conflict gives the name to the battle. All battles have specific dates and places. Chapter 2 of the Book of Alma gives as much information for the Battle of Zarahemla as we have for some of the great battles from ancient history. In this chapter, there are many details. The battle takes place over a period of 36 hours. On the first day, there was a civil war between opposing sides on the east side of the river Sidon. The engagement on the first day was fierce. There were 12,532 men killed on one side. On the other side there were 6,560 killed. The casualties on the first day were more than the number of men who died in the Battle of Gettysburg. The total number of combatants in the Battle of Zarahemla were likely more than 65,000. The second day involved Lamanites who came from the west. An important part of the battle was the crossing of the river Sidon. The city of Zarahemla was on the west side of the river Sidon. All these details are taken from the original records kept by Alma, who was the commander of the Nephite forces. The details are so clear. The terrain is so clear. There is no other place in the world where the Battle of Zarahemla in 87 BC could have taken place than in that place that is identified on the map of the battlefield. Zarahemla's location is the key that opens the physical truth of the Book of Mormon. The Battle of Zarahemla is limited in space and time. The battlefield has a space of 8 miles by 8 miles. The first day of battle was on the east side and the second day on the west side of the river Sidon. There is no other battle in the Book of Mormon that has more details. The exactness of the account makes it possible to plot it on a map. The pivot point is where the Valley Gideon ends on the east bank of the river Sidon. This is where both armies crossed the river. The Amalekite army crossed on the evening of the first day. The Nephite army crossed on the morning of the second day. The terrain for the Valley of Gideon is clear. The September 1837 survey of Robert E. Lee shows the place where an army can walk across the river. This is the point where the ancient account of Alma ties into the modern maps of the United States. Alma would say that God was with his army when he took his large army crossed the river Sidon on the morning of the battle's second day. The details for the Battle of Zarahemla as described by Alma help us find the location of North America's largest ancient city. The lay of the land is of great significance for the tactics of the battle. Once the battle is over, there is only one place in the world where the history of that battle can be told. It is on the battlefield where the war is lost or won. It is in the heat of battle where leaders must command and control their forces by completely focusing on the destruction of the opposing side. The objective of a battle, regardless of time and place, is to close in and to destroy the enemy. The terrain has an impact on the engagement and movement of forces. Alma gave as much information for the Battle of Zarahemla as we have for many of the great battles in ancient history. On the morning of the first day the armies took their positions. The battle started as a formal appointment between the opposing sides on the hill Amnihu. This was a strong position for the Nephites to make a good defense. The backside of the hill had the Sidon River, and that meant that the Nephite army could put its full attention on the Amalekites, who would have to attack from the front. From the outset of the fighting, the Nephites began to slay the Amalekites upon the hill east of Sidon. Soon the Amalekites began to flee, and the Nephites quickly pursued them and did slay them with much slaughter. This was a nasty political conflict, and after a few hours of fighting the royalists had lost and the freedom-loving Nephites were chasing the Amalekites down the Valley of Gideon towards the east bank of the river Sidon. The first day of battle was a bloody affair, with the tactically superior Nephites cutting off retreats and the Amalekites having to clamber across their own dead or dying as they tried to leave the field. And it came to pass that when Alma could pursue the Amalekites not longer, he caused that his people should pitch their tents in the Valley of Gideon. The engagement on the first day was clearly in favor of the Nephites. It was brutal hand-to-hand combat. Death came from the stabbing of swords, the slashing of scimitars, the casting of arrows, with stones, and with slings, and all manner of weapons of war, of every kind. There were 65,000 warriors fighting in close quarters, inflicting as many as 1,000,000 blows on the opposing side. On that day, Alma reported that 12,532 Amalekites and 6,560 Nephites died in battle. The death count on the first day was more than the total number of men who died in the 3-day Battle of Gettysburg. By any historic standard, this was a fierce battle. The Valley of Gideon had strategic value because it was close to a crossing of the river Sidon. The valley was 5 miles long and was filled with the bodies of dead men. Soon after the end of battle, Alma sent spies to follow the remnants of the Amalekites, that he might know of their plans and their plots. The plot became clear. Amlici made an agreement with the Lamanites to get their support. Even though Amlici had lost the first day of battle, on the second day he thought that he could win the war by taking Zarahemla. In the morning, Alma's 3 spies, Zeram, Amnor, and Leva, returned in haste to the Valley of Gideon. Being greatly astonished and in great fear, they reported that the Amalekites had joined forces with the Lamanites. The spies reported that there were refugees who were fleeing with their flocks, and their wives, and their children, towards the city of Zarahemla. Alma's army immediately understood that to protect their families who were within the walls of Zarahemla, they would have to move quickly across the river Sidon to fight not just the Amalekites but also the Lamanites. The place for crossing the river Sidon is critical to the story and to our confirmation for the location of Zarahemla. On the morning of the second day, Alma's army was camped in the Valley of Gideon. We have identified the hill Amnihu and how from that hill through the Valley of Gideon the armies went down to the river Sidon. The question is easy to formulate. First, Sidon and the Mississippi are the same. This river is one of the world's largest rivers, and has a huge volume of water. With a length of over 2,000 miles, the river has only a few places for an army to cross on foot. From the Valley of Gideon, downriver about 4 miles, is a river crossing that Robert Ely identified in his 1837 Des Moines Rapids survey. At river mile 369.5 there is a place of crossing where horizontal limestone ledges on the river's bottom. The limestone is nearly flat in its formation and goes across the width of the river. The crossing is in the Keokuk Gorge, where the river has the hard rock path that was well known to both the Nephites and Amalekites. At the time of crossing, the movement of armies on the west was treading down the grain in the fields. It was the time of harvest, and the water flow of the Sidon River was at its annual low point, making the crossing even more accessible to the warriors. The point of crossing was fixed and tied perfectly into the lay of the land, making it such an important part of Alma's recounting of the Battle of Zarahemla. On the morning of the second day, there were 4 groups of people who were in motion. First, Alma's army was crossing the river Sidon in order to help with the defense of Zarahemla on the west side. Second, Amalek's army positioned itself at a place where they could attack the Nephites while they were still in the water. The Amalekites would destroy Alma's army and then move upriver 5 miles to take Zarahemla. Third, the Lamanite army was moving towards the river crossing from the southwest in order to help Amalek's army destroy Alma's army. The Lamanites recognized that the Nephite-Amalekite war offered them the chance to take control of Zarahemla. Fourth, there were refugees moving north on the west side of the river towards the city of Zarahemla. In this, as in other wars, the lives of refugees were most vulnerable. In the face of strong forces, they naturally sought the protection of the defensive walls of the city of Zarahemla. From a military point of view, all these movements presented a very complicated set of circumstances. The people who were in transit either as part of the 3 armies or as refugees were more than 100,000. Including the population of Zarahemla, those who were already behind city's defensive walls, the number of people who were involved directly or indirectly in this war was about 250,000. It certainly seemed that Amalek, through a shrewd strategy, had put his army in a powerful position where they would be able to put maximum pressure on Alma's army while they were walking across the river. From the river's west bank, Amalek's army was in a position to create a killing zone with lethal crossfire coming from 2 or more positions. This moment was so significant in Alma's life that he later would write a complete account, and 450 years later Mormon found Alma's account so compelling that he devoted a long chapter to the telling of the whole story by engraving it onto the gold plates. The story came to us 2,000 years later through the prophet Joseph by the gift and power of God. These details are important because the imprint of the story is found in the flow of America's largest river over the hard rocks of the Keokuk Gorge, whose geology created the topography for the hill Amnihu, the Valley of Gideon, and the place of crossing. The events of the second morning moved fast. And behold, as they were crossing the river Sidon, the Lamanites and the Amalekites, being as numerous almost, as it were, the sands of the sea, came upon them to destroy them. The Nephites being strengthened by the hand of the Lord, having prayed mightily to him, the Lord did hear their cries, and did strengthen them. The story moves to its most dramatic moment. Alma fought with Amalek with the sword, face to face, and they did contend mightily, one with another. And it came to pass that Alma, being a man of God, being exercised with much faith, cried, saying, O Lord, have mercy and spare my life, that I may be an instrument in thy hands to save and preserve this people. Now when Alma had said these words, he contended again with Amalek, and he was strengthened insomuch that he slew Amalek with the sword. Is it not exciting that the place of this very dramatic moment of salvation can be identified within a range of plus or minus 200 feet in the river on the west bank of the upper Mississippi at river mile 369.5? Alma fought Amalek in the river. He prayed to the Lord for strength. The Lord heard his prayer and gave him strength. Alma slew Amalek with the sword. This place of salvation is presented by Alma and preserved by Mormon and is now found in the unique geological formation of limestone rocks in the 11¼ mile long Keokuk Gorge. The rock formations allow us to orient the geography of Zarahemla to the place that God revealed in March 1841 to Joseph Smith, in section 125 of the Doctrine and Covenants. The Battle of Zarahemla ended in favor of the Nephites. Alma slew Amlici with the sword, and he also contended with the king of the Lamanites and his guards. Then they cleared the ground on the west bank to finish the battle, that thereby his people might have room to cross and contend with the Lamanites and the Amlicites on the west side of the river Sidon. And it came to pass that when they had all crossed the river Sidon, that the Lamanites and Amlicites began to flee before them. And they fled before the Nephites towards the wilderness which was west and north, away beyond the borders of the land. Yea, they were met on every hand, and slain and driven, until they reached the wilderness, which was called Hermounts, and it was that part of the wilderness which was infested by wild and ravenous beasts. This video clip is an integration of Alma chapter 2 to the lay of the land and the flow of the river as they were established by the geological formations that are associated with the Keokuk Gorge. These events presented an interesting challenge. We took the 36-hour account of Alma and oriented it to the terrain as found on modern-day maps. We kept our focus on an area that is 8 miles by 8 miles. We found the location for Hill Amniu. From there we went down the valley of Gideon to the river Sidon, and from there to the place for walking across the river. At each point we had exact coordinates found on the grids of modern maps. Suddenly, the whole area became an artifact. We marveled that the details for a 2,000-year-old account were found in the imprint of the hard rocks of the 11¼ mile gorge that forms the Des Moines Rapids. Alma wrote the first-hand account in 87 BC. After 450 years, Mormon read the account and decided to engrave the story on plates of gold. Nearly 2 centuries ago the angel Moroni gave these gold plates to Joseph Smith for him to translate by the gift and power of God. We now have the opportunity to examine the truthfulness of the Battle of Zarahemla that took a day, a night, and a day. We needed to be careful about how we did this. We understand that there will yet be a future day when we will have a chance to meet Moroni, and he will tell us directly how he preserved this ancient record so that we would have the chance to test its truthfulness in the rocks and water of the mighty Mississippi. If it matters to God, it should matter to us. God is very careful with time and space. Jerusalem is where Jerusalem is, and for the fulfillment of God's word it will remain there through the end of time. The first revelations of this dispensation dealt with the exact locations for Zion and the New Jerusalem. As they say about real estate, there are only 3 things that matter: location, location, location. Christ shall rule and reign from the New Jerusalem. For out of Jerusalem shall go the word, and out of Zion shall go the law. Does anyone suggest that real estate doesn't matter in the Bible? There is no other land that has been examined more carefully than the Holy Land. We need to apply this same standard to the lands of the Book of Mormon. Let's make a calculation. Nearly 1/3 of the verses in the Book of Mormon make or give references to space and time. How can we hope to have an accurate history of these people without clear references to space and time? If there is no record of name, date, and place, there is no opportunity of doing any of the saving ordinances for the dead. Life has meaning because we have the place and time for our existence. We compare the Bible to the Book of Mormon. That book has the truth that is found in its own setting, just as the Bible has the truth in its setting.